I'd like to wrap up this series by talking a bit about the stage language and theater imagery in Macbeth. It shouldn't come as too much of a surprise that theater and acting is drawn on as a metaphor throughout the play. William Shakespeare made this the business of his life. He wrote his plays, staged them, probably acted in them as well. And one of the great rules of writing is that you write about what you know. But there's more than just a subconscious reliance on stage and theater language on the part of Shakespeare going on here. The language is used deliberately, especially by Macbeth. In the final act of the play, we're given a very clear idea of how he views the world and how one should, or actually how one must, live within it. But first let's talk about the instances where props or costumes are mentioned. Macbeth, in his heart of hearts, knows that he's not the rightful king of Scotland. He knows his station in life, but he ignores it, and when he does so, he becomes like an actor on stage who has been placed in the wrong costume, and he can't make readjustments in order to make himself more presentable because the show's already rolling. At the beginning of the play, after the three witches have made their predictions and vanished, Macbeth and Banquo are greeted by the Thanes Angus and Ross, who have been sent by King Duncan. And the following conversation takes place. Angus says, "We are sent to give thee, from our royal master, thanks, only to herald thee into his sight, not pay thee." And Ross adds, "And, for an earnest of a greater honor, he bade me, from him, call thee Thane of Cawdor, in which addition, hail, most worthy Thane, for it is thine." And Banquo whispers aside, "What, can the devil speak true?" And Macbeth says, "The Thane of Cawdor lives. Why do you dress me in borrowed robes?" So Macbeth initially hesitates even to accept the title of the Thane of Cawdor. The title's uncomfortable to him, like borrowed robes would be for an actor, or like putting on a pair of bowling shoes that don't really quite fit. In this same scene, Banquo picks up the stage language as well. The Thanes can see that Macbeth is lost in fantasy at this point, and he's not really paying attention to them. And Banquo covers for him and says, "New honors come upon him like our strange garments, cleave not to their mold, but with the aid of use." So, sort of like buying a new pair of jeans. At first they're stiff and you can't get comfortable in them, but then they conform to your body shape and almost become like a second skin. But these new garments don't wear so well on Macbeth with use. In fact, the more heinous he gets, the more treacherous, the less form-fitting they become. At the end of the play, as Malcolm's forces are getting ready to attack the castle, the same Thane from earlier, Angus, makes this observation about Macbeth. "Now he feels his secret murder sticking on his hands. Now minutely revolts upbraid his faith breach. Those he commands move only in command, nothing in love. Now does he feel his title hang loose about him, like a giant's robe upon a dwarvish thief." In other words, he's in over his head. He's become nothing more than a dwarvish thief suffocating under a robe that's too big for him, this robe being the robe of royalty. Also notice that he's a dwarvish thief, and remember back to the last video where we talked about Macbeth becoming more of a monster, more inhuman as the play progresses. Now when we think of modern-day theater, and even of theater in Shakespeare's time, the actors' costumes pretty much consisted of the wardrobe and that was it. But in ancient times, in Greek drama, there was another important element of the costume, the mask. Each actor would have a mask of their character that they would wear continually. And of course, you couldn't portray emotions like fear or sorrow or happiness, but back then it wouldn't have mattered because they wouldn't be able to see your face that clearly 10 rows back anyway. Nowadays, we can go into the movie theater and we can count Robert Downey Jr.'s nose hairs if we want to. But back in ancient Greece, the spectators had to put up with the frustrations that we still put up with now when we go to see a sports game or a concert. We have to strain to see, unless there's an overhead screen. And that's why I've never been a fan of live anything. I don't see why I should pay good money to go to a baseball game, hope that the weather is going to be good, and only be able to see the players like little ants on the field when I can sit at home in the comfort of my own living room and watch the game on TV and see everything up close. I don't know, that's just me. But the reason that the Greeks wore these masks was because they amplified the actor's voice. It's the same effect as when you cup your hands to your mouth and you sound louder. Since the mask enclosed the actor's face except for a mouth hole, It acted as a sort of megaphone so that people far back in the amphitheater could hear what they were saying. Now, even after plays started being performed indoors, masks were sometimes used for artistic effect. And the imagery of masks shows up in Macbeth just as much as the imagery of costumes does. But they almost exclusively tie into the idea of doubleness of character. After the first Thane of Cawdor is proven to be a traitor, Duncan makes a remark to the effect that, if only you could tell what was in men's hearts by their faces. If only. Unfortunately for him, he couldn't. But Macbeth understands this all too well. At one point he says, "Away, and mock the time with fairest show. False face must hide what the false heart doth know." False face. A mask. Later, when he's telling Lady Macbeth that she needs to be nice and courteous to Banquo until he can find the opportunity to kill him, he says, "Let your remembrance apply to Banquo. Present him eminence, both with eye and tongue. Unsafe the while that we must lave our honors in these flattering streams, and make our faces vizards to our hearts, disguising what they are." A vizard was another term for a mask. So we can see that this doubleness comes almost second nature to Macbeth, as a practical matter of survival. But Malcolm deplores it. He utilizes it when he absolutely has to, like when he tests Macduff in England and pretends to be something that he's not. But the idea of putting on a false face, or of being false in any way, sickens him. He even tells Macduff that the first lie he ever told was the one against himself in that scene that we talked about earlier. The morning that Duncan's body is discovered, Malcolm and his brother Donalbain briefly consort with each other while everyone else is still in a panic. And we find here the real reason for their running away. It certainly wasn't because they killed their father. Malcolm says, "What will you do? Let's not consort with them. To show an unfelt sorrow is an office which the false man does easy. I'll to England." Donalbain says, "To Ireland I. Our separated fortune shall keep us both the safer. Where we are, there's daggers in men's smiles. The near in blood, the nearer bloody." They can't trust anyone. The Thanes will smile at them just to put a dagger in their back when they're least expecting it. And Malcolm feels disgusted at having to put on a similar show. When he talks about an unfelt sorrow, he's not saying that he isn't devastated that his father's been killed. He's simply saying that to put on a show of grief, to mourn as expected, isn't really genuine. Another one of Shakespeare's famous protagonists, Hamlet, expresses the same reluctance to show this stage grief as Malcolm. In that play, after the death of his father, the king, his mother asks Hamlet why he's still grieving after all this time. And it turns out that it's only been 2 months, but I don't want to get into a long discussion about Hamlet, and why his father's death seems to be affecting him so particularly. And Hamlet replies, "Seems, madam, nay, it is. I know not seems. 'Tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits of solemn black, nor windy suspiration of forced breath, no, nor the fruitful river in the eye, nor the dejected behavior of the visage, together with all forms, moods, shows of grief that can denote me truly. These, indeed, seem, for they are actions that a man might play. But I have that within which passeth show, these but the trappings and the suits of woe." There's a customary grief that involves wearing black clothes, crying one's eyes out, fainting, and then there's real grief. And Hamlet, and Malcolm, distinguishes between the two. Anybody can pretend to be grieving. It's what's expected of them. And another idea somewhat similar to this can be found in the Bible. In the New Testament, Jesus Christ says this, "Moreover, when ye fast, be not as the hypocrites of a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces, that they may appear unto men to fast. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But thou, when thou fastest, anoint thine head and wash thy face, that thou appear not unto men to fast, but unto thy Father which is in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly." So this sort of play acting is hypocrisy to Jesus. When somebody's fasting, they shouldn't be going up to everybody that they see and saying, "Ugh, I'm fasting, I'm so miserable, I'm so hungry, this is so rough. In the same way, a person who is grieving, perhaps for the loss of a loved one like Malcolm and Hamlet are, look on those who run around crying, saying, "Look how sad I am. Can't you see my tears? Oh, this is just so awful," as hypocrites. Those sorts of people make the sad occasion all about them. They won't stop talking about it. But now I want to step back and look at the bigger picture. We've talked about costumes and masks, but now it's time to talk about the world and life itself, especially about Macbeth's worldview. In a short scene, right after the murder of Duncan, we get a conversation that takes place between the Thane Ross and an unnamed old man. And Ross makes a comment about the weather and makes a connection between two things that Macbeth will make later in a more famous portion of the play. He says, "Good father, thou seest the heavens, as troubled with man's act, threatens his bloody stage." So all that's been going on is man's act, and the earth is his bloody stage. If you've read any play or script at all, you know that acts are segments into which a production is divided. Macbeth makes an act reference as well earlier on, after he's been told that he's the new Thane of Cawdor. Thinking about the three predictions of the witches, he says, "Two truths are told as happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme." In this instance, there's almost a musical connotation, as if he's talking about a symphony or an opera. The imperial theme, or his reign as a king, is swelling. It makes one think, or it makes me think anyway, of something like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. The first three movements of the symphony, although not quite quiet, are kind of what you expect, and then you get to the fourth movement and the chorus bursts out in song in this great sweeping rush, and it kind of blows you away. Well, in a similar way, Macbeth is envisioning his future kingship as a swelling, dramatic climax to his political career. This happy vision doesn't last for long. The most obvious example of stage language in the play comes from one of the better-known passages of the play as a whole, in a speech that Macbeth gives as the enemy is fast approaching and he's just been told that his wife is dead. But before we talk about that speech, we need to set up Macbeth's frame of mind as it's developed throughout the play. When he discovers Duncan's body in the morning after his murder, he comes out to his friends looking flabbergasted, shaking his head, and he says, "Had I but died an hour before this chance, I had lived a blessed time. For, from this instant, there's nothing serious in mortality. All is but toys, renown and grace is dead. The wine of life is drawn, and the mere lees is left this vault to brag of." Now, of course, he doesn't mean any of this, but what he says here turns out to be strangely prophetic. We've talked in an earlier video about how Macbeth becomes jaded. He's supped full of horrors, and awful, tragic sights and deeds are familiar to him now. He's no longer startled by evil. Macbeth is, in a sense, an old man's play. There's a lot of weariness of life and a lot of regret that builds up in Macbeth until the final scene. Before the end, he says this, "I have lived long enough. My way of life has fallen into the sere, the yellow leaf, and that which should accompany old age, as honor, love, obedience, troops of friends, I must not look to have. But, in their stead, curses, not loud but deep, mouth honor, breath, which the poor heart would fain deny, and dare not." He's done. He's got nothing left to live for. Becoming the king didn't bring him happiness, killing Banquo didn't bring him peace of mind, and killing Macduff's family didn't bring him security. He's got nothing. And then listen to what he says when he's told that Lady Macbeth has died. He says, "She should have died hereafter. There would have been time for such a word. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." Dismal and gloomy enough. But when we think about theater, and about literature, and about art in general, usually we think of art as imitating life. What Macbeth is saying here, and what's so interesting, is the exact opposite. It's life that imitates art. The world, in the end, is revealed to be nothing more than a stage. What seemed real the whole time was scripted, and by Macbeth's reckoning, scripted poorly. But I find the idea that life imitates art very fascinating. In the late 1800s, the dramatist and novelist Oscar Wilde, whose works were extremely popular, actually made this exact argument in an essay entitled The Decay of Lying. He says that reality, nature, is crude, unplanned, and that art, in good art, we find form and truth. But when art tries to imitate life, it just gives us a reflection of the vulgar, natural world that was already there. The things created by poets, novelists, dramatists are more real, more worthy of being discussed than the things of nature. We read that life imitates art far more than art imitates life. This results not merely from life's imitative instinct, but from the fact that the self-conscious aim of life is to find expression, and that art offers it certain beautiful forms through which it may realize that energy. Now Macbeth, laden with guilt and an encroaching sense of destruction and nihilism, seeks to express this all through the language of the stage. Once the curtain closes, nothing matters anyway. The audience can go home and, if they choose to, forget all about what they saw and not take away any moral lesson or new idea from the experience. Now, this is actually the opposite of what theater was originally intended to do. We read in Aristotle's Poetics that drama is supposed to serve as instruction. And keep in mind that Aristotle was writing back in ancient Greece when theater was extremely popular and everybody had an opinion about it. In the Poetics, he says, "It is clear that the general origin of poetry was due to two causes, each of them part of human nature. Imitation is natural to man from childhood, one of his advantages over the lower animals being this, that he is the most imitative creature in the world and learns at first by imitation. And it is also natural for all to delight in works of imitation. The truth of this second point is shown by experience. Though the objects themselves may be painful to see, we delight to view the most realistic representations of them in art, the forms, for example, of the lowest animals and of dead bodies. The explanation is to be found in a further fact. To be learning something is the greatest of pleasures, not only to the philosopher, but also to the rest of mankind, however small their capacity for it. The reason of the delight in seeing the picture is that one is at the same time learning, gathering the meaning of things." So poetry and theater allow for us to observe things about life that we wouldn't have been able to contemplate properly if they had actually been happening to us. For instance, here in Macbeth, we get to investigate the mind of a killer, experience his guilt, his fear of discovery, his ambitious drive. If all the things were actually happening to us personally, then there wouldn't have been time to process everything and we wouldn't have learned anything. Because we're detached from the situation, none of us are murderers, or hopefully most of us aren't, we can experience these things vicariously and derive a sense of pleasure and of instruction from them. But of course, in Macbeth's mind, there's no point to any of it. Art can't reveal great truths to us, and since life only imitates art, it's useless as well. And on that cheery note, that'll just about wrap up this video series on Macbeth. That's not to say I won't ever talk about Macbeth again in the future, but for now anyway, we're going to move on. Next up, we'll discuss another Shakespeare play, Julius Caesar. You might be thinking, why another Shakespeare play? Well, being that this channel is still new, I want to put out material that will be helpful to as broad an audience as possible, and as I've discussed before, Shakespeare is almost universally assigned in high schools and colleges across the country. Also, I really enjoy Shakespeare's plays personally, so there's a bit of a private motivation to proceed this way as well. But after Julius Caesar, we'll take a break from Shakespeare for a while and move on to some novels and maybe some poets. So thank you guys for watching and stay tuned.